as a scientific community. We need to start thinking about doing more of these kinds of reviews of each other's work and engaging in that back and forth commentary and debate that we need to engage in by YouTube, Rumble, video format, by podcasting, and hosting debates over podcasts, and go with it, because I think it would be fantastic in the long run. Minor technical difficulties to start the day, but hello folks, it's good to be back again. I got an interesting one to talk about. Here, this piece came up from the Heterodox STEM Substack, and it was absolutely fascinating for me. So I figured it would be great for us to talk about, because it highlights some interesting things. It's a long piece, so I'm not going to go all the way through it. But I encourage you to go read it, because I think it's actually really, really fascinating. And if you're science world and you're not following Heterodox STEM, I encourage you to change that and follow Heterodox STEM, because they're damn good in the things that they put up. But first off, some just housekeeping notes. I will be on vacation next week, so I will not be putting up any videos. I will see you all the week after that on YouTube and, of course, on Twitter. I'm going to try to avoid social media while I'm on my vacation. And that is that for now. Anyway, let us begin here. So this comes from the Heterodox STEM Substack, written by Charles Reichart. I don't believe I'm pronouncing that name right, but please correct me if I'm wrong. Recent studies show and the rise of Twitter science. Now, where this comes from, and I actually really, really appreciate what he says here, where this comes from is you'll often see it all over the place all the damn time. Studies show this! Scientists prove this! And then go read said study, and said study either says nothing of what the media hyped it up to be, or nothing of what was or overblew it, or any number of different things, and also tend to ignore it when things get retracted, as has happened, or ignore it when things have not been published. A prime example of this: there's a paper, a preprint, and a preprint is a paper that has not gone through peer review yet. It has not been officially published by any journal as yet, but it's been made available for people to read before it gets published. But oftentimes, there's preprints that really shouldn't be out there at all, because they're salacious, controversial, or they, can catch media attention, what have you. One such example of this, a couple of years ago, there was something called alphabetism that was published in the author, not published, but was put in a preprint. And what the authors thought was basically that, based on their research, they found that people with first letter of your last name closer to the end of the English alphabet meant you were going to have a harder time in life. It's basically what they found. I read the preprint, I found it and read it, and it was a piece of junk. I'm sorry, it was a mess to me. I had lots of problems with it, and I can understand it, to my knowledge, never made it to publication, and was never published anywhere for a variety of different reasons. But there was a tremendous number of news articles that were written about it. Scientists say this! And it was crap. And they never came back and pointed out the fact that this is a preprint and that it was never published. Never did that. So here's the interesting one we want to go through. Someone forwarded me a recent Twitter announcement saying that a preprint conclusively shows that the National Science Foundation exhibits systemic racism in its grant funding decisions. Quote, decades of systemic racial disparities in funding rates at the National Science Foundation. Now, I did see this. Part of the reason I didn't review it for this channel or anything like that yet is because it is a preprint. It has not gone through peer review and been published yet. That's what I'm waiting for. Chen et al. 2022. The announcement was followed by a large number of retweets proclaiming that this amazing work and that something needs to be done about the National Science Foundation grant funding process. The main author of the study also tweeted out about the paper, saying to read it and think about it, both of which I did. I came to the conclusion that this preprint and its accompanying social media hype highlight the danger of just saying studies show, without understanding what a given study can or cannot really show, and are indication of what I call the rise, indication of the rise of what I call Twitter science, quote, as I describe in this essay. That's why I encourage you to read this, because I think what he's making a point about with Twitter science is a really, really, really valid point. So let's see. I am often amused. Oh, wait. Not often amused. I am often asked by my non-scientist family members and friends for my opinion about a new science result they had just heard about on the media, Facebook, or Twitter. Often these stories begin, scientists prove, or studies show. When I look at the actual scientific paper being highlighted, I find that sometimes it is something that is simply cute or amusing, but not exactly groundbreaking. Other times it is clear that what is presented in the news report, post, or tweet is not actually about what the paper was saying, or that the paper is merely suggesting the possibility of something rather than showing something. For example, the paper might simply be providing some evidence for possible explanations of long-standing observations, or it might be presenting a highly speculative idea that has a low probability of actually turning out to be true. Some of my colleagues have expressed concern that the media may make stronger claims about the results of the original paper than I did. Wait. Strike that. May make stronger claims about the results than the original paper did. Sorry about that, I was reading too fast. So, general public can be forgiven for not understanding that just because the media has highlighted an interesting idea with a low probability of being correct, this does not mean it's true. The whole multiverse thing, for example, is actually pretty far out there. It is not a mainstream theory there. It is out there among cosmologists, don't get me wrong, but it is not a mainstream theory. That's what he's pointing out in that particular paragraph. The other type of science stories that are also tweeted and highlighted in the media are those that seem to confirm a prevailing popular opinion or help enforce a political point of view. Some years, a vegetarian friend told me, quote, scientists have shown that eating meat makes people selfish and antisocial. The particular study was from Diederik Stapel, a Dutch scientist who performed a series of high-profile studies that were published in top scientific journals and were regularly quoted by the media. The problem was that all of Stapel's work turned out to be fraudulent, and the papers were retracted. One could say that this simply demonstrates that science works, meaning that fraudulent results get detected, which is true. But just recently, the same friend brought up this study again to make a point, even though I told him years ago that the study was fraudulent. Now, I want to make a point with this, because this is a very, 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 very good point. The thing about this is that scientists being human, we suffer from confirmation bias no different than anyone else. And so you got to train yourself against those instincts to just automatically go with something because it confirms your prior notion or something you already believe. But, you know, Tim Pool has talked about this on his show, actually, with respect to news media. That the news media may publish something utterly salacious and completely false. It gets attention, it grabs headlines, people read it, retweet it, and then it comes out that it's false, and the media corrects it with this little tiny line notation correction thing, and nobody sees the correction. The same thing happens in the public when it's a news media thing with retractions of articles. It is very rare for everybody to hear about the actual retraction. It's very common to hear about the controversial results of a study, or the results of a study that presuppose these different things, or that, make a splash and what have you, but you never hear about the retraction when it's utterly fraudulent and false. This is also a problem. And that's what he's pointing to here, is this person, this friend of his, still believes this is true, despite the retraction being out there. And this is one thing that I'm actually very much interested in seeing happen, is that when retractions happen, that they be much more public in that sense, particularly if it was something that got a lot of presence and push from the news media. The news media need to acknowledge that the article that they pushed based on the study that is fraudulent is now itself also a mess of falsehoods. Doubtful that that will happen, but that's what I'd like to see. Let's see. One can see why the general public is susceptible to these types of issues, because they often do not really understand how science works. They think of it more like a light switch performing a study is like flipping a switch, and either the light turns on or it doesn't turn on. So you have a clear-cut result and you are done. They're not necessarily acting unreasonably because they are assuming that if something is being talked about on social or news media, it must not only be important, but has been carefully vetted and is highly likely to be true. This is a thing that happens. We talk about this in the communication side of things with science, is that you often have mediators between the scientists doing the published work and the public receiving it. And often those mediators are whomever's in the news, whoever's talking about news, including me. At this point, if you're talking about me in my YouTube capacity, if I was talking about some of this scientist work, which I have done many times, I'm often the mediator in here, trying to tell you what it says, but at the same time, adding a little bit of my analysis on top of it. And so I do not blame the public at all. But this kind of thing, he doesn't talk about it in here, but this kind of thing and this kind of notation, I think, about the news media mediating the communication of research to the public is part of the reason more and more scientists in my generation and younger have started the idea of communicating via Twitter. So if you look online in the Twitterverse, you will find things like hashtag academic Twitter, hashtag science Twitter, hashtag SciComm, or any SciComm kind of things, science communication. Those things all exist now primarily because of the recognition that maybe we should have direct communication between scientists and the public. But as he's going to point out, this is, I think I've had a problem with it for a while, which is why I don't talk too much. I don't tweet too much about it without actually reading something. I do try to take as much depth as I can when I review an article, and Gina and I try and do it when we do articles for the Rogue Journal Club. So yeah, it's confusing. It's confusing and curious what goes on with that. And so here's where we want to talk about those particular aspects. The issue I am having is that I'm noticing more and more working scientists engaging in the same behavior as the general public. They email or tweet that some new studies show or prove such and such result, or they tweet out, our group just submitted a new preprint that's showing that something is happening for sure for this reason. This is followed by dozens or even hundreds of retweets from other scientists saying, amazing job, super great work, truly convincing, no doubt a Nobel Prize awaits you, or double plus good work. Many of the retweets arrive only a handful of minutes after the original posting, so it is obvious that few retweeters actually read the paper. This is particularly odd because most scientists regularly review papers and attend talks. A paper review can be rather time-consuming when done properly, and any scientist can tell you that they may have initially thought a paper was likely correct and novel, but that all sorts of issues arose once they actually looked deeper into the results or thought about the implications of what the authors were saying. Exactly. This is why we have peer review, is to help with these kinds of things, to get rid of the fraudulent stuff, yes, but also to help catch those kinds of things that you realize, oh, wait, it's not fraudulent work, but this wasn't done right, and the implications really aren't what you think it is, or, oh, wait, you got an error in this equation over here. There's no way it could possibly be that. Or occasionally, sometimes you have biased researchers, biased research that is presented to you in peer review. That does happen on occasion. Thankfully, it is not rampant from what I could tell. But it does happen. This is why tweeting stuff like this isn't a good thing. Because obviously, as I said, scientists are prone to confirmation bias themselves. Because we're experts, particularly in our own field, not necessarily in others. So if we believe something and we see something else that confirms our belief, well, retweet it. Those kinds of things do happen. So, one often realizes that their first thoughts about the paper based only on the reading of the title or abstract did not at all match the actual results. This is why there is a lot of people who will say, I just read the abstract and the conclusions. And for most people, that is probably fine. That's probably going to give you enough information. But to truly understand whether a study has actually done what it said it was going to do, answered the questions it said it was going to answer, or attempted to answer the questions it said it was going to answer, you got to read everything. You really absolutely have to read everything, and you have to think about it. And it is very difficult. You can't do that quickly. It's not suitable for Twitter world of instant information to review a scientific article and actually get into the meat of it. It's not suitable for that in the slightest. And yet, we need to do that. But what he's pointing out here is that a lot of scientists who just start retweeting stuff because they agree with it, within minutes of a paper being published, or within minutes of a preprint being released, you didn't read it. You didn't critique it. You have no idea whether or not it's good, or it actually says what the authors say it says. Let's see. I would expect scientists are already completely familiar with the points I have just raised. Nevertheless, all the time I see scientists touting the results of a preprint or even a published paper they have not read or understood, not due to the actual contents of the paper, but because they assume it supports one of their scientific or political beliefs, since a media or social media announcement said a fantastic new study shows. Let's see. This brings me to a recent example of a phenomenon and the danger it entails. Recently, a preprint was posted on the internet that was titled, quote, Decades of Systemic Racial Disparities in Funding Rates at the National Science Foundation. Now, there was a piece published in Science about it. It was shared all over the goddamn place. And, I may have talked on this channel about the Science article that was written about it. I don't believe I did, but I may be wrong. I have not reviewed the paper yet because I generally like to try and stick to stuff that's peer-reviewed and is not a preprint when I'm reviewing stuff. The amount of social media, tweets, and science media attention expended on this preprint shows that the preprint is indeed having an impact and the issues it raises must be addressed. However, I have found no discussion of the actual results or other possible reasons for the disparities. Instead, all of the social media traffic consists of congratulations to the authors for clearly showing systemic racism, or statements that probably, if extra factors were considered, the racial disparity would become even worse. So, here's the thing. This is a long essay, like I said, so I'm not going to go through all of it today, but I encourage you to read it. He's going to get into is making a point that the authors didn't consider all these other factors. He actually goes on to point out what I have talked about many times, and what many other authors who've talked about this have pointed out many times, that the notion of systemic racism being the cause for everything is the single cause fallacy, or as Coleman Hughes puts it brilliantly, I think, the disparity fallacy, assuming that any disparity is caused by systemic racism, when that is not necessarily true. And he goes on to highlight a couple of other reasons why he thinks the disparity in NSF funding could happen. So I'm not going to go into that. What I'm more interested in here is the other aspect that he talks about. Like I said, this is a long essay. So again, I encourage you to go read it. I think it's fabulous what he did here. So author, if you hear me, I think you did a great job. This is a fabulous piece. And it makes some points that I certainly have been interested in. Though I think what would have been nice to see added to it was what I would have thought. Strike that. Was what I'd mentioned previously, which is the notion of why is some kind of thought discussion on why there's been more emphasis on Twitter. And it does have to do with in part with the recognition of the mediating effect of news media, and the desire for scientists to communicate more directly. So more and more in my generation and younger, I'm a millennial, an older millennial, but I am a millennial, are going to be scientists on Twitter and Facebook and TikTok. I have heard more and more recently about scientists on TikTok, which please, you gotta avoid TikTok. TikTok is a mess. That's all I can say there. Chen et al. Tweeted out their findings and even asked for feedback. This sounds good in principle, but the retweets from other STEM scientists gave very little feedback, but instead repeated how this work is amazing and important and clearly shows the effects of systemic racism, which says something about the education of scientists and the lack of thinking about this more carefully to not immediately jump up and down and say, no, it's not systemic racism. You don't know that. There are other mechanisms you didn't explore. What is obvious is that these other scientists did not read the paper, put any thought into it, or consider possible alternative explanations or contributing factors. I also fault some of the science news media for reporting on this preprint without including any counterpoints or caveats, noting that this is only a preprint that has not yet undergone peer review, and that other issues could be impacting the data, or that other explanations might turn out to be correct. If Chen et al. Had themselves actually considered other possible effects, the science news media reports might have mentioned that fact. The danger is that more media coverage and tweets the preprint receives, the more likely it will just come to be accepted as true. Yes. In my email to Chen et al., in which I sent them a link to Reichart and Reichart 2022, I told them they could post it on Twitter to further feedback they claimed they wanted, but they did not respond, nor did they tweet out the comment on their work. Twitter may be an excellent platform for posting boasts, emojis, or insults, but it is a very poor medium for conveying complex information that can have subtleties of the type that often arise in science. Very true. Very, very, very true. I would actually prefer that more scientists do podcasts, or more scientists do YouTube like this, or Rumble preferably, or Locals, or what have you, because you can get into long forms and you can talk about some of the nuances and you can take care of some of those things. You can't do that on Twitter. You can't do that very well in a Facebook post. And a lot of things gets lost in text, too, when you're talking about it in terms of like a Twitter thing where you've got 288 characters and maybe a thread of tweets. It gets lost really, really quickly because people have short attention spans on Twitter. Let's see. Tweeting out that, quote, so and so just put out an amazing, fantastic study proving that is not the same as a rigorous referee process, and scientists should also make clear that any scientific study does not prove or show something. It can only provide some evidence or some argument for something. Now that the Chen et al. Preprint is out on social media and being endlessly circulated in tweets, even if referees eventually point out the problems with the analysis and the results are substantially modified, or if the work is never published, or if a comment to the paper is published, the original finding of the preprint will be enshrined as an established truth from now on, right up there with bumblebees not being able to fly, and everyone will simply assume that NSF is facilitating systemic racism. This underscores the danger of what I call Twitter science, in which researchers can tweet very shoddy or misleading work just by highlighting a couple of sentences of the result, particularly a result that favors a particular agenda, while conveniently omitting any possible confounding issues or competing effects. When the results align with some political point of view, the tweet is likely to be received happily by followers who shower it with numerous adoring comments and retweet it to hundreds of people, few, if any, of whom will ever actually read the work. If some months or years later the paper ends up being rejected or modified in a way that undermines the original results, it is sure to bet this fact will never be tweeted. In the end, the original tweet and claims will be commonly accepted as being true, and the authors will be given lots of credit. This is a horrible way of doing science. But if it starts working for advancing the careers of scientists, we are sure to be more of it. And that is exactly where there is the concern. The other thing, he goes on to point this out here, and I think I'll probably read this paragraph real quick, but another effect is what I call the Twitter asymmetry, where even if someone brings up points or links articles that contain counterpoints to the result, that person is blocked or attacked. I have seen cases where a poster will say, quote, I just read a paper by so-and-so, and I am so angry because it says my pet political project is wrong. I know it is in bad faith. However, I will not even link the article because I do not want to bring attention to it, and I urge others to ignore it. One thing that I do not do, you always notice on this channel when I review an article, when we review an article for Rogue Journal Club, there is always a link to the article in the show notes. There is always a link to the article in the description of every video that I do. Why? I want you to go read it. I want you to go read it yourself. Don't just rely on me. Go read it yourself. And you can give me whatever fun commentary you want to give me yourself. I want to hear it. Yet when I find said paper, it usually turns out to contain very reasonable scientific points. The tactic is an active method for preventing inconvenient information from circulating. Also, arguing that something is in bad faith does not address the points raised and is completely irrelevant. I would very much enjoy seeing this tactic used in the next low-temperature physics conference. Quote, I'm sorry, but I cannot address your point about how large the error is in our measurement of the exponents near the superfluid transition because I believe this point is in bad faith. I'm sure the audience would not accept this as a valid response. As noted already, Chen et al. Did not find it convenient to tweet out a link to Reichart and Reichart 2022 raising questions about their work. So, Now, since this is heterodox STEM, this brings me to an additional issue that arises for the studies of topics that have political implications. Some people will be afraid to speak up about possible scientific problems with these studies for fear of being attacked or canceled. This is completely counter to how the scientific method is supposed to work, but as we have seen in recent years, a number of professors have spoken up, have paid a price. Who have spoken up have paid a price. Thus, even if someone identifies a problematic issue, they are motivated to keep their mouth shut. This leads to an asymmetry in any criticism of these types of studies. Nature abhors wasted asymmetry, so sometimes scientists might start taking advantage of this criticism asymmetry and select politically charged problems to study, secure in the knowledge that any negative critique of their methodology or conclusions is a sign of a moral failing by the person raising the criticism, making it unnecessary for them to need to defend their work on a scientific basis. The reason why this is concerning is that's postmodernism right there. Most of the postmodern literature abhors. If you're going with the postmodernist, which is the more philosophical name for the colloquial woke, the problem that you have is that they view any amount of debate as evil, any amount of debate and discussion as illegal, unless you already agree with their fundamental premise. But if the fundamental premise is something you disagree with, and you express that, you are considered having moral and intellectual failings. And that is a problem. One of the reasons why having postmodernism around in STEM is a bad thing is because of that. Because it disallows any debate, because of the presumption that if you disagree, you have a moral problem. You have moral and intellectual failings if you disagree with me, is the postmodernist view. And that's not truly what it is if someone disagrees. Nor should it be judged as so. I am rather suspicious of the motives of many of these people who push for expanded studies in certain politically charged topics and promote works in these areas. Call me cynical, but in many cases I seriously doubt that these people actually care at all about possibly socially relevant issues being addressed in a productive manner. Instead, they are simply doing this to advance their own careers. A dead giveaway that the motives are not exactly pure is how fast people launch an attack, often an ad hominem, against anyone who points out an issue with their work. This has happened to me. It happened to me. Rather than seriously taking the points raised by the criticism into consideration. If they actually genuinely cared about the topic, they would approach a criticism in the same way that a scientist approaches any legitimate scientific problem. They would study the criticism very carefully to try and get all the relevant data and would look for the most effective ways to address the issues raised because they want the result to be as correct as possible. Indeed, legitimate working scientists normally want to gather as much information as possible on other points of view of the topic to reach the truth. It is rare to see this approach applied for certain research topics. Instead, the response to a criticism is insults, accusations, or calls for sanctions. Spent enough of my life in Southern California to know the telltale signs of a hustler when I see one. And we don't need hustlers in science, that's for damn sure. So, to the author, Mr. Charles, because I can't figure out how to pronounce your last name, I apologize. Bravo on the piece, I think it's fantastic. And, I think Twitter science is a bad thing. And it's why I don't often do retweets of pubs via Twitter. But you'll see me do more reviews like this, where I do it on YouTube. And to be truthful, I would love to see more scientists do that. Where they actually do, if they actually want to have electronic commentary back and forth in the social media kind of sphere, instead of doing it over Twitter, do it on a YouTube channel. It is easy as blazes to start one. You might need to figure out production value and things like that. It took me a little while to figure this out. But start a YouTube channel. Comment on an article. Screen sharing software is out there for free. You just need a webcam and a microphone. That's really all you need. And that's actually what I would love to see. To me, that's the next generation of doing reviews of articles. Is that, and doing the back and forth commentary, because we are moving into a more virtual space. As a scientific community, we need to start thinking about doing more of these kinds of reviews of each other's work and engaging in that back and forth commentary and debate that we need to engage in by YouTube, Rumble, video format, by podcasting, and hosting debates over podcasts, and go with it, because I think it would be fantastic in the long run. And because it would open up a whole new avenue of open science transparency for the rest of the world to see. what is it? Communality. That scientific knowledge belongs to all. Okay, let's do that. Let's do that with video, with podcasting, with all the rest, because it is not terribly difficult to do necessarily. That's it for now. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. And until next time, I'm Adrian. Stay curious, everybody.